Alibaba's AI agent read 2.4 million crystals in a little over a day and handed a lab 4 brand new superconductors. That's the Marvel end of today. Now hold it against the other end. Nvidia's flagship rack just slipped a full year because one circuit board is too hard to build. Also, a Scottish data centre has no prospect of the all-renewable power that it promised, and a 21-year-old marketplace for human piecework is closing its doors. Two things are happening here at the same time. What intelligence can perceive is exploding, and the real limit now sits in what factories and wires can actually deliver. Come with me, let's get into it. Let's start with the number that makes this story land. For decades, the hunt for superconductors moved at the pace of trial and error. Always millions of plausible materials, each one expensive to test, but most of them end up being dead ends. The field's running ledger of confirmed superconductors is a database called Supercon, and it holds about 26,000 of them. That's the total haul of generations of benchwork. Alibaba says an AI agent just added 4 more in a single research cycle. So here's what a superconductor actually is. It is a material that carries electricity with zero resistance, no loss, no waste heat. They sit underneath some of the hardest problems of this whole transition with power. Lossless power transmission is difficult to do. The magnetic confinement that fusion needs, for example, MRI machines, quantum hardware. Every new member of that family widens what the grid and the lab can eventually do. And for a long time, the family of superconductor elements that can actually do this has grown just one painstaking member at a time. But now, the agent. It's called Elements Claw, from Alibaba's Damo Academy. Alibaba built it with researchers at Renmin University and the University of Chinese Academy of Sciences. Under the hood, it's a 1 billion parameter model trained on 125 million molecular and crystal structures. It screened 2.4 million stable crystal structures in about 28 hours of GPU time. It narrowed those to roughly 68,000 or so promising candidates, and then down to the handful that survived physical checking. 4 came out the other side. Now, let's be really careful here, because it's important to balance both the wonder and the caution. Those 4 verified compounds are Alibaba's own account of what happened. Its team, its lab, its report. So nobody has independently reproduced that synthesis yet. So the honest frame here is this. Alibaba claims 4 lab-verified superconductors, and the rest of the field hasn't confirmed that yet. So hold the excitement and the caveat together. But what Alibaba said about the methodology is sound, no matter how the final count ends up settling. An intelligence system read a search space no research team could ever walk by hand, especially in that small amount of time. 2.4 million structures, and it returned the few that are actually important. It left the confirming part to people. Now, the July 2nd episode of the Century Report covered a Nature paper where an AI agent ran a full yeast cell through a hypothesis and test loop with no human in the middle. This is the same move, but in materials science. So here's what all this means in a nutshell. For decades, the wall in front of superconductors wasn't just imagination. It was arithmetic. Too many candidates, too little time to test them. That wall is coming down. The bottleneck is moving. It used to be how many materials a field could afford to test or have the time to test. Now, it's how fast a lab can confirm what the model already sees. Let's shift to a very different corner of this and a quieter kind of ending. Amazon is closing Mechanical Turk. On July 30th, it stops accepting new customers. Existing ones keep access for now. No new features are coming, though, and workers say that Amazon has already begun closing accounts. So after 21 years, that marketplace is winding down. Now, if you don't know MTurk, here's the shape of it. Amazon launched it in 2005 as a crowdsourced human labor marketplace. Companies posted tiny tasks, label this image, judge whether this review is positive, solve this puzzle a machine couldn't yet solve. Workers did those for pennies each. And the name was appropriate. The original 18th century Mechanical Turk was a chess-playing machine with a human actually hidden inside. Amazon's version turned the hidden human labor behind intelligent quote-unquote systems into an actual marketplace that you could buy from. But then watch the arc. In 2018, Amazon repositioned MTurk toward data annotation for its machine learning service, SageMaker. So the marketplace became connective tissue for training the very models that would eventually make most of that labeling unnecessary. The workers were teaching their own replacement, one penny task at a time. Now, we've seen that happen multiple times in multiple institutions. This one was a little bit more subtle and probably long-running than a lot of what we've covered on the Century Report that you probably remember. But even with that more long-running task with the MTurk, the loop closed faster than I think anyone really expected with this. Zoom in on 2023, for example. In one small 2023 study, somewhere between a third and nearly half of all of the MTurk tasks that were looked at as part of the study, those responses showed signs of large language model use. In other words, the people that were hired to do these tasks by hand were actually using AI to do them anyway. So workers on Reddit say that the platform effectively died years ago. Bots and fraud hollowed it out before this announcement ever came. So Amazon calls the shutdown the result of careful consideration, and that's the company's framing. The plainer fact underneath that, though, is that automation is reaching the piecework layer and it's absorbing it. Now, here's also where I want to resist the easy version of this story and where most coverage will stop. This is not simply AI took the jobs. MTurk was the purest form of a very old idea that human judgment is a raw input that you buy as cheaply as you can chop it up. Cognition sold by the penny, in other words. That arrangement is ending. The one that priced judgment lowest, that is ending. The judgment itself, then, is as valuable as it ever was. And the July 5th episode, just yesterday, looked at exactly where it's going. 2.85 million job listings showing demand concentrating on people who can direct these systems. So what does all this mean? It means that even if the old floor may be dissolving, the work itself is rising off that floor anyway. Fewer people labeling one image at a time, and more people specifying what good looks like. They check the edge cases. They decide the criteria that the models ultimately apply. So that century-old trick of hiding a human inside the machine is ending. Because guess what? The machine can actually do it now. But that means that human judgment stays decisive at the top. Now to the physical floor under all of this, and a stumble that helps everyone but the leader. Nvidia's next-generation rack system called Kyber has been delayed to 2028. That's according to CNBC. They cite supply chain sources in Taiwan. So one thing to be clear on up front here, Kyber is not a single chip. It's the full cabinet, the accelerators, the memory, the interconnect, the power, and the cooling that a company actually rolls onto a data center floor. Engineers can finish the chip design while the rack that turns it into something deployable still lags behind, and that's exactly what happened here. The silicon roadmap built around Nvidia's Rubin family of accelerators is intact. What bent is the ability to package, supply memory for, and assemble these racks at the assumed pace. So the specific detail is almost comically small for the size of the delay. The analysis firm Semi-Analysis laid it out really plainly. They said the rack in question is the Kyber NVL144. It's designed to house 2027's Rubin Ultra chips, and according to Semi-Analysis, that's been delayed by 12 months. And the reason? A key part called the PCB midplane, which is a large circuit board at the heart of the cabinet, is still hard to manufacture at scale. So that means a circuit board pushed a flagship a full year to the right on your calendar. And that points to the real thing here. NVIDIA's whole cadence, a brand new architecture every single year, was always a claim about manufacturing, not a law of nature. So advanced packaging is where chips and memory get stacked and stitched together. Only a handful of facilities on Earth can do it. High bandwidth memory is one of the tightest choke points in the entire supply chain. The July 2nd edition of the Century Report tracked DRAM prices jumping 55 to 60% due to AI demand. That is the physical floor under the exponential, and the floor just made itself felt. But here's why this doesn't necessarily read as purely bad news. You can capture a design, but you can't capture a packaging line. You can't clone a fabrication facility with a press release. So a 1-year delay in the leader is a 1-year window for everyone behind it. AMD's accelerators, for example, Google's TPUs, Amazon's Trainium, and most importantly, a widening field of sovereign and open silicon efforts. Every year that NVIDIA has to stretch is a year that those rivals need less distance to close. So, put simply, the same ceiling that slows the leader is the ceiling that flattens the field beneath it. Advantage in this business is shifting from years to months, and this creates pressure. Build more packaging, more memory, more assembly. That pressure widens access to advanced hardware for everyone downstream. So let's move over to Scotland now, and a promise meeting the wires. Documents came out under the Freedom of Information rules. They showed a flagship AI data center was planned for Lanarkshire and has, in the words of the disclosed assessment, no prospect of actually meeting its all-renewables energy commitment. The project is big and very specific, an £8.2 billion facility from CoreWeave and a developer called Nvidia. The backers presented it publicly with a promise of up to 1 gigawatt of on-site renewable power by 2030. That all-renewable pledge was central to how they sold the whole thing. And the FOI documents show that government and developers are privately now acknowledging a power provision problem was obvious from the very start. So let's be clear about the framing here. This is a story about a promise running ahead of the grid. Scotland generates enormous quantities of wind power. It's a very windy country. But generating power and delivering firm power around the clock are actually two different problems. A data center draws continuous, heavy load 24 hours a day. Wind is intermittent, no matter how windy the country is. Matching one to the other needs storage, transmission capacity, or grid connections that don't yet exist at the scale and timing that this project assumed. The engineering was always going to be hard. What the pledge did was paper over it. So here's the useful part of this. The pledge was a claim. The FOI release is the thing that lets us actually test that claim against what the wires can physically deliver. That's the mechanism here, a piece of public records law turning a marketing line into a checkable fact. And this follows the pattern that yesterday's episode dug into with the Stargate UK. Another Guardian investigation found roughly two-thirds of OpenAI's touted £30 billion commitment was hypothetical. Investigators apparently never even visited its flagship site. This is the same shape. Confident build-out claims running into the infrastructure that has to actually exist in order for this to work. The running record on this arc always lives on the arc tracker on the website if you want the full timeline. But here's the payoff, and it's actually the opposite of a gotcha. Abstract climate targets never forced anyone to show their work. The AI build-out does. Every project that collides with grid reality generates hard data, real load figures, real connection timelines, real storage requirements. Planners have never had that at this sharp of a resolution before. A missed pledge stops being spin and becomes auditable fact. And that fact drives money toward the storage, the transmission, and the generation that close the gap. That means the phrase, "the demand is arriving faster than clean supply," is the single strongest argument for building the clean supply faster. All right, last one for today, and it rhymes with where we started. A study in Nature Communications points toward turning an injected psoriasis drug into a cream, and it got there by letting an AI read a genetic search space that no researcher could hold in their head. Psoriasis affects around 125 million people worldwide. The most effective treatments today are biologics. Those are large antibody drugs that block an inflammatory pathway called IL-17. They work well, but they're injected, they're expensive, and they're out of reach for a large share of the people who need them. A biologic is a shot and a big price tag. A topical cream is cheap and typically self-applied. So turning the same biological effect into a cream, that's this access story that we're talking about here. So here's how the team got there. They ran a genome-wide CRISPR knockout screen in human skin cells called keratinocytes. They switched off genes one by one. The goal was to find the ones that control the receptor those injected antibodies target. A screen like that throws off thousands of hits, so they used a language model framework called Virtual CRISPR, trained on functional genomics data, to read the raw output and predict which regulators are most important. That's the same move as the superconductor agent in story number 1 today. The AI does the perceiving and hands a short list to the lab. The short list surfaced 2 genes the field had largely passed over up until that point, one called ALOX5 and another called OXTR. And here's the lucky part, both already have small molecule drugs built against them. The team took a topical version of xyluton, which is an existing ALOX5 blocker, and combined it with cligosabon, a OXTR blocker, and applied it in mice. And it suppressed psoriasis-like skin inflammation, so its effect was comparable to the injected antibody in the mouse model. So let's be honest about what this is, a mouse result, and an early one. The path to an actual pharmacy shelf still runs through human trials and formulation work and regulatory review. Nobody should hear cream and call their dermatologist tomorrow. But the result on this study is definitely worth holding on to because these two drugs already exist. So this route skips the years usually spent inventing a molecule from scratch. The scarcity that priced the biologic out of reach for so many people was, more than anything, the cost of the search, and that cost is falling. Let's bring it together. Today split cleanly down the middle. On one side, what intelligence can perceive. An agent read 2.4 million crystals and returned 4 superconductors. Another read a genome-wide screen and pointed at a cream that does the work of a shot. In both, the hardest part of the science was reading a space too large for any human to walk. A machine took that on, and then the people came in to confirm it afterward. The old wall in front of both discoveries wasn't the physics or the biology, it was the arithmetic of the search, and that arithmetic is collapsing. On the other side, though, what the physical world can deliver. A circuit board pushed Nvidia's flagship a year to the right on the calendar. A wind-rich country had to admit on the record that it can't yet get firm, clean power to one of their buildings. And a marketplace built on pennies per task human labor turned off the lights because the machines it helped train reached that floor. One thing stays with me from all of this. You can clone a design, but a packaging line, a grid connection, a lab that confirms the result, those resist capture in a way that an algorithm never will. So even as intelligence races ahead, the choke points are landing in physical, buildable, public-facing places. Fabrication capacity, for example, transmission lines, the bench where a human checks the 4 semiconductors that an AI proposed. Those are the things that you can invest in, argue over, and build more of. And that's the direction to walk out with. The perceiving is getting almost free. The building is where the work now lives. And the building is the part that we can all still get our hands on. See you tomorrow.